Hey guys, this is JamSack, also known as Civil Fallout for my Instagram. Now, as some of my long-term followers may know, I once did a little series on my Instagram called Fallout Thoughts, in which I just put little thoughts out what I thought about Fallout and what might happen. Now, one of those is a little theory I put out there about how the East Coast and the West Coast Brotherhood may get into some sort of civil war with each other, of the Brotherhood of Steel. Now, I think I want to elaborate that, to be honest, to say the entire Brotherhood, and I'll kind of lead on to the bigger picture near the end of the video. Now, I've seen a lot of YouTubers doing or a couple of YouTubers I've seen doing the difference between the West and the East Coast of the Brotherhood of Steel. And just kind of give you a bit of backstory, and we'll kind of quickly fill in, and then we'll kind of lead on to Capital Wasteland, and then I'll elaborate onto the full extent of the theory. All of this is trying to be done in one little take or voiceover, so if there's any sort of issues, I'm just going to continue. Okay, so basically, first off, we have the Mariposa military base, which everyone may know if they played the original games, which is where the Master basically set up the Super Mutant Army with the FEV VATs, that sort of thing. Now, before the Great War started, there was a small group of US soldiers that were sent there for security. And when they saw the experiments happening there, what they decided to do is they deserted the US military moments before the war happened, so it wasn't really fully acknowledged by the US military. And also, you found that when they did desert, it was because of the fact that they saw the atrocities that was happening at Mariposa, and so they decided to actually split away from the US government and create their own faction dedicated to stop this sort of cruelty or kind of misuse of human intelligence, if that's the way to say it. And so what they did is they formed the Brotherhood of Steel, which was led by Roger Maxson at the Mariposa military base. They then interrogated and killed the scientists and went on to found their own base at the bunker of Lost Hills in California. I believe it's in California anyway, unless I'm miscorrect. Now, after a few years passed, different high elders and things like that, and I've already put one of my own Instagram posts about how the high command is set out. Now, the high command basically set out to send a contingency over to the capital Wasteland with basically the objective, I believe it was basically I think it was to see the extent of the Master's army, and I think it was along that line to see how another chapter was doing over there. And on the way, the contingency led by who would become Elder Lions, basically first of all they travelled through Pittsburgh. And as a few people who've played that DLC in the pit, they cleansed the city, leaving behind a couple of soldiers, some who died, and Asher who stayed behind to actually basically rule the city. They cleansed it of all the troglodytes, which is caused by the smog and radiation. It created the troglodytical disease, or pathogen. And they then eventually moved on to Washington, D.C. Now, the most unusual thing to start off the difference between Elder Lions and the West Coast is the fact that Elder Lions actually allowed children into their ranks. Now, if any of you may or may not know, the Brotherhood don't usually let children straight in, even if they're offspring of Brotherhood of Steel members. They have to actually earn their way into the Brotherhood of Steel. If not, they potentially cast out, which is quite unusual, quite cruel. But I suppose it's the way of keeping up superior training and skills, and not just letting in anyone simply because of feelings to an extent. Now, that's the start of Elder Lions, is a kind of change in attitude. Now, I call him now Elder, because while he was there in Capital Wasteland, they actually found the Pentagon, which they later called the Citadel, and there they found Liberty Prime and stocks of weaponry. We also find out they even had access to alien weaponry that's kept there. If you like the Citadel and the Brotherhood of Steel DLC, you find actually alien blasts and ammo. And so we know that they found significant technology there, and so the High Elder decided, as well as the ruling council of elders, decided that he should become an elder to control a chapter there, to kind of, due to the fact they had enough ammo to control them there for years, and to see what other technology could be gained from the capital of the United States. See, the interesting thing is that it wasn't just the only reason wasn't technology for them. They also saw the DC as almost as a figurehead idea, that if they took the capital of America, or the pre-war America, they'd almost have a later claim for a government of like a pre-war style government. It's kind of like the NCR's trying to do now, except for Brotherhood style. And so yeah, but that was also another reason why they went there, which I'll talk about more towards the end as well. Now, Elder Lions, he eventually established his base there, as we all know, and we meet in Fallout 3 not with the sort of attitude you'd expect from a Brotherhood of Steel or Elder. He seemed more interested in helping the people, which was sliding away from the West Coast ideals. Now, what we find out is that while he was there, he saw the extent of the super mutant problem in the DC ruins, and what he decided to do was prioritize helping the people, or the wastelanders there, which was already quite a strange turn away from the usual Brotherhood ideals about changing their objective. This caused a lot of unrest within the Brotherhood, and as a result, the outcasts were created, who were basically a splinter faction of Brotherhood of Steel there, who were more interested in the West Coast ideals and didn't want to basically prioritise helping the people. They thought, fuck them. Not literally, of course. And because of that, basically what we find is there's already an extent of a small, almost debate, or not debate, but another kind of fight between them. They never fought at any sort of particular point, no sort of real violence happened, but they were kind of they weren't massively threatened, like they just trusted each other heavily and were not communicating one another. Now, in addition to this, they also worked on Project Purity, which is another effort which you would think would help the West Coast in terms of gaining some sort of control here. But if anything, this just frustrated the High Council more, because all they wanted was the technology, and the Project Purity was simply not relevant to them. And so as a result, they basically stopped communicating with Old Lions and would not talk to him for a number of years. What we find out is not long after the events of Fallout 3, Old Lions actually dies, being replaced by several elders who are ineffective until they're replaced by Roger Maxson, the founder's descendant, Arthur Maxson. Now, the interesting thing is about this is the fact that Arthur Maxson, despite his young age, being I believe about the age of in his early, I believe it was within his teen years actually when he became the Elder, he was actually able to not only bring the outcasts back into the actual chapter there, but he also led them to almost quite a strong military force there. They found T-60 armouring, basically armouring themselves with higher technology than before. I think it was two series higher up than the T-45. And in addition, they also built the Pridwin from the remains of basically the Adams Air Force there. In addition to this, we also find out that they expanded their numbers heavily, and they also took technology from the River City to power this Pridwin, showing almost his military might that he now had in the Capital Wasteland. And we hear that he almost completely suppressed the super mutant threat. Now, that was quite a lot of backstory, and we're now going to kind of lead on into how I think this could escalate. Now, in Fallout 4, we see Maxson is almost not necessarily war crazed, but almost war prioritizing, and what we see of him is that he's actually been not necessarily Nazi-ish, but his intention is basically to cleanse and basically not purify, but you know what I mean. He wants to get rid of synths. He sees them as a huge threat, and mutants also as well. And to an extent, they're also quite against ghouls. Now, what we can see from this is that he's taken almost an enclave sort of attitude with this. That it's almost not a far stone's throw away from the almost enclave sort of style of no radiated affected creatures. It's not entirely that, but we don't see it as too far away from that sort of attitude, which is something to note. In addition to this, what we can see is the fact that Maxson, when he came into the Commonwealth to deal with the Institute, he did not communicate with them, as far as we know, and he made no attempts to actually build a contact or actually establish an alliance of any kind to actually get the technology from them. The first thing they noticed was an energy signature from them, which is several characters mentioned from the Brotherhood, and they went straight into the Commonwealth in order to find out what it was. The moment they find it out from the Institute, they send in... What do? Do they send in a small group of soldiers, almost infiltrate it like the Railroad Minutemen every other faction pretty much does? No. What they do is they send in their warship. They send in the Pridwin, the biggest thing they could possibly have, which is basically, interestingly enough, the Pridwin is a reference to King Arthur and his ship, so it's almost like the king declaring his war. He marched straight to the Commonwealth for basically their prized weapon, as well as Liberty Prime on board, so that's two of their strongest weapons, ready to fight. And it almost seems like less of a helping the people, but more or less of setting an example of them, to kind of show them what the Brotherhood can do. And also to show the Maxson, or not the Maxson, show Maxson to the rest of all the other elders that he is the strongest chapter. Now I see this as building onto the idea that he is interested less in necessarily helping the people, but also to set an example of showing his might. Now, let's look back a second over at the West Coast and see what's happening. We found out from Fallout 3 they've been struggling with territory problems, and also with basically fighting against the NCR. Now, what a lot of people may not necessarily picked up on, because it's not really heavily elaborated on in the games, is that just before New Vegas, we find that after the Enclave were defeated Navarro from the NCR Brotherhood of Steel, the Brotherhood of Steel and NCR actually got into conflict, mainly because Brotherhood of Steel didn't see that the NCR deserved the technology that the Enclave gave to offer, and didn't think they could use it appropriately. As a result, the NCR and Brotherhood got into a bitter war with one another. It looked like the NCR had the upper hand, and then the Brotherhood of Steel crippled their gold supplies, which damaged their currency, and also then the Brotherhood of Steel looked like they had the edge, and then basically the NCR almost near the beginning of New Vegas basically hit back with their manpower because they vastly outnumbered the Brotherhood of Steel and basically killed a vast amount of them, pushing a lot, even the high command, back into their bunkers, and basically put them into retreat. As a result, they've actually been quite weakened. The Brotherhood of Steel was still fighting, which is mentioned in New Vegas. However, they're simply not as strong as they used to be, and this is also seen in Helios 1 with their defeat at the hands of the NCR. And basically what we can see from here is that the West Coast has essentially been crippled as a military might, and we see the East Coast as growing in strength. Now, in addition to this, Arthur Maxson, he's an interesting character because he's kind of bitter from the loss of Sarah Lyons, who he had a crush on at a young age, and he also is bitter from the idea of the Institute in the fact that it poses such a threat to them. And we potentially see that their involvement in the Capital Wasteland in Fallout 3, he could have potentially picked up on, and it could potentially, as a random theory, Sarah Lyons could have easily been a synth that had been replaced, and he was bitter for it, and that what led his anger against the Institute, which is potentially unlikely, just a random theory I thought I'd throw in there. Now, what we now see from Fallout 4 onwards is we see a Maxon that leads the strongest Brotherhood of Steel might that we have seen so far, and we've heard of a West Coast which has been crippled and damaged, and there's some people saying that you got the Texas Brotherhood, but that's not really been heavily confirmed in canon. It's not necessarily been confirmed as to what their might really is, to the extent where you could probably assume the NCR have made their own push in that direction as well. Now, to kind of encapsulate my final thoughts, I see that the Brotherhood of Steel are a faction which has a collection of chapters which share different ideologies. The problem is with this is we see then we see conflicting ideologies, and as a result of this causes such issues as difference between the ideas of the chains that bind from New Vegas and not necessarily continue to the East Coast. And we also see simply a different way of approaching situations, where the Fallout 3 Brotherhood chose to help the people. The Fallout 4 lot, even the same chapter, decided to prioritise territory and war. And back to the West Coast, they prioritise technology. So you can just see how different ideas and different chapters have just different aspects of looking at things. And I can see this as being quite, if anything, leading them to spread off slowly and slowly, whether they'll unify to fight the NCR, or potentially an enclave threat in Chicago, in Illinois. We don't know. All I can say is that the Brotherhood of Steel are becoming more and more divided, and with Arthur Maxson's almost figurehead idea of wanting to push forward and basically take out the strongest enemy before it arises, looks like he's pushing the direction of wanting to be the High Elder. He is, in theory, the most, in terms of his own blood, he is the most rightful one to have the place of the High Elder, seeing as most of his ancestors before him have the title. And in addition, it's not known who the High Elder currently is, so it would make almost quite a fitting thing to find out that in the next game. And I believe the Brotherhood of Steel ending will be canon in Fallout 4. Therefore, we'll see him pushing onwards towards California and pushing for control of the Brotherhood of Steel on the whole. Now, as I've said before, this is only just a theory. This is a rambling theory. This is my theory, but hopefully you lot enjoyed it. This was all done one take, and I'm going to probably cut out some of the rambling if I can. But if you have any thoughts about this, let me know. But it's just a random theory I'm putting out there. But I just think it would make an interesting thing to build on for the next game about the Brotherhood of Steel that's currently in crisis and fighting one another. I think that would make an interesting, like a really fantastic game. Just my thoughts. Don't give me hate. Thanks for watching.